Hello, everybody, and welcome to StarNet Link. And today on my YouTube channel and on my podcast, we have a guest today, and this is Null. And Null is a vampire, and he's going to discuss a little bit about what vampires are and about his kind. So go ahead, Null, introduce yourself and to the audience.
Hello. For this interview, I am going to refer to myself as Null. There's a chance I will be recognized by one or another name elsewhere, but Null will work for my particular purposes. I consider myself a vampire. Vampirism takes a few different forms. There are people who live the lifestyle of a vampire but don't really consume blood. There are those that do. There's some that consume the spiritual energy of others. Vampirism in general just means you require another source of energy that you couldn't get from things like, for example, some people get energy from exercising or eating food or interacting with other people. None of those things would do a whole lot for me. I get energy, or I guess alternate sources of energy in a few different ways. Most of the time, it is either through psychic vampirism or very rarely do I drink actual blood since that's kind of risky in a lot of instances. But yes, vampirism in general, other sources of energy that aren't very common to the, I guess you would say, normal person.
How so has vampirism has that been around for ages, or is it just a new sort of community?
I would imagine it would have been a very old idea. I mean, as far as I know, most cultures have some sort of vampire, but what we associate with vampirism today is based off of, I suppose you would say, like the more European side of things. But in my case specifically, I don't know how long I've been like this, but I've been like this long enough to know that it's not really a choice for me.
So are people chosen to become vampires, or is it more like a force, like more like a force thing that's put on a person?
I do know of people that were, there's a few terms thrown around like sired or chosen or something like that. For me specifically, I'm not too sure what caused this. All I know is like this is the way I am now, and I have no desire to change.
Are people born vampires, or do they suddenly change into vampires when they get older?
So that can vary a little bit. Some people have, I believe it's referred to as, what is it? What is that word I'm trying to think of? Either like medical vampirism or clinical vampirism. That's it, where they psychologically and medically feel the need to get blood from other people. And that's more in the line of basically being born that way. There's some people who use psychic vampirism for spiritual purposes or basically because I feel like being baneful and wrathful and taking energy on purpose, or to as a way to fuel themselves. And then there's this people who kind of are a mix of both ideas where they need alternate energy. They can survive without it, but they won't be fully functional if they don't have an ex or another source of energy. For me, it's a third thing. I can go without an extra source of energy, but it's not going to be fun if I go without some sort of external source for too long.
How did you find out that you were a vampire?
Um, I've always known something about me was a little, I don't want to say off, but I mean, I started researching black magic and like witchcraft and things like that when I was around the age of 9. And then I I mean, I had an idea of what vampirism and what vampires were from an early age, but I always thought that was like a fictional thing that no one really did that, or the people that did that were crazy or mentally ill. And so when it came around to the time when I kind of started to do more research into it, I actually discovered that there is a whole world of people who identify as vampires and actually do things like drink blood from one another, or they get donors, which that's the thing people do. They will offer themselves as donors for people who are vampires. Then there's also people who drink things like different kinds of blood from animals and things like that. I don't really do that. I don't have too many options when it comes to that kind of thing. I don't particularly remember when I realized I was like this, but it wasn't that long ago because I remember telling people that I was particularly close to that I was having blood cravings and I needed to find a donor soon. So it was somewhat recent, but it's been longer than 5 years.
Now, is it true that vampires live longer than humans, or is that a myth?
That's hard to say. I mean, according to one source I found that I can't find now because it's been a long time, there are vampires that supposedly live for hundreds of years, but they don't want the world to know about their existence, and so they will disappear from public records entirely. And if that's the case, these people don't want to be found. And as a result, sources are going to be hard to find and even harder to verify. But as for the average vampire, I mean, I think that's going to vary from person to person. The world is an unpredictable place after all.
So, on a scientific level, would you still consider yourself as a human or like a separate species from humans?
I mean, I don't. mm, I don't necessarily consider myself a different species, but I see vampires more of kind of like a title, but not one anyone can just use. To be a vampire on any level, I would think that you would have to, in some ways, enjoy the darker side of life and enjoy the act of potentially stealing spiritual energy, or in some cases, enjoying the fact that you, metaphorically speaking, take life from other people. So it's not really a separate category or different species, but it is a category that I would imagine the average person would not want to associate with.
Does taking this type of life force or energy, does this hurt the person or does it just make them tired?
So there are instances where it can't hurt a person, but this also depends on how you're taking it. So usually for me, it's not always a conscious action. It's kind of more of a side effect of me trying to essentially recharge my battery. Or let's say if I'm like a mobile phone, I'm just a mobile phone that can use multiple chargers at once. And if I'm in a room full of people, I I may be using their phone chargers to charge my phone battery. I just may have forgotten about it. And now I'm basically being charged constantly. So, in a way, it can be harmful. And if you're doing things like, let's say, like making wounds into people to take blood that way, that would hurt a little bit, but blood flows, wounds heal. So, nothing, I would imagine nothing too permanent would happen, but I do know that if you take someone's spiritual energy for the purposes of using it for, let's say, a baneful curse or something like that, that's when it would actually be much more deadly.
So with vampires, and I know that you guys have your own community, do you guys have your own like law system or ethic code or religion in some regards?
I have actually asked other vampires about this. There are courts, or yeah, let's just call them courts. Um, there's different communities and things like that. I know in the goth subculture specifically, there are not really subcategories of goth, but goths would typically be more open to this kind of thing. I do know there are lots of vampires in places like, I want to say Louisiana, New Orleans, probably places in Europe, but I haven't been to Europe, so I can't confirm this. Even where I live, there is a community of vampires, but they're not very active, and a lot of their events you have to be invited to by another member. As for rules, that also varies, but one thing they do say is do not take energy from someone else who is unwilling to give it to you, which, I mean, we're just going to say I may or may not have broken that rule in particular.
So with vampirism, so you said you had different courts. Does this mean that you guys have your own unique government structure or hierarchy?
Yes and no. I'm not a part of any governments in particular. I just kind of live my own lifestyle and may join up with like a sort of, I guess, court system at some point in time if I feel a need to do so. There are titles like princes and kings and lords, but they're all kind of, it's kind of like homecoming king and queen. They don't mean anything long term. It's just a matter of having a fancy title and wearing a sort of veil of I guess like aristocracy or something like that. Like it sounds nice and it looks nice, but it's not anything that would really hold any power in the modern world. It just sounds nice and can sound intimidating to certain people.
So so when it comes to vampires, um was a lot of the stuff that you know now, was it a lot of it self-taught, like stuff that you had to learn on your own, or did it just become natural to you over time?
Um, Almost all of it self-taught, and a lot of it I had to really look around for. And as far as I know, I am the only person I know who knows as much about vampirism as I do.
So there's not other vampires that help other new vampires with coming into this type of lifestyle. You guys don't really have a support system.
In certain places, there are support systems and there are people who can sense other vampires. I just don't happen to be in an area where that's really common. It's actually practically unheard of where I am. But in other places and with other vampires that actually live in vampire populated areas, there are people that will tell you things and help you get to a place where you understand yourself and the vampire world at large. I just don't happen to be at one of those places.
So have you met older vampires that might tell you history from the past and tell you how much has changed? Have you met older vampires? Have they told you your story or told their story to you?
I haven't met any in person, but I have met met in quotation marks. I don't remember where I found this person, but I have been informed that vampires now are what you would consider like the more mortal variety. Most of us aren't going to live for hundreds of years, but there are what you would consider like immortal vampires who, for one reason or another, just are either extremely hard to encounter or just do not want to be found or interacted with. I wasn't told any specific locations, except that they reside in a place called Old Russia, but the person I talked to could not give or did not want to give specific locations. And I was informed that these vampires did not speak any modern languages and that they were more or less, I guess you would what I guess a good analogy would be if you found a vampire, they wouldn't be able to communicate with you in any way you would be able to understand. So they could potentially, if you could interact with them and find one, then they could tell you the history or maybe turn you into one. But until they're found, and once, you go through the process of making yourself hmm, presentable, I guess, then these ancient vampires might be able to tell you about some things the average person wouldn't know. But until all of this is figured out, we're kind of in the dark on this one.
So the other question that I have is, do vampires have their own human form, or can they metamorph into a different type of state, like vampires that you see in movies? Can they like metamorph into different forms, or is that just a myth?
I haven't. Nah, we're mostly stuck in a human form. As for immortal vampires, they might be able to do such things, but I haven't encountered any, and they haven't been encountered for hundreds or even thousands of years, and they don't want to be encountered. So, as a possibility, but I haven't encountered such things, and I certainly can't.
Does so in, I guess, the Starseed and spiritual community that I'm educating people about, has your views changed since becoming a vampire and understanding the concepts of spirituality or the different types of, I guess, psychic abilities or any type of that? Has that changed your viewpoint of how you like view the world now, becoming a vampire?
I mean, I have studied a variety of occult disciplines and religions that practice magic. And as a result, I would say I am more educated in certain ways and more open to certain ideas as compared to the average person. I still don't consider myself very religious in the sort of, I guess you would say, theological sort of way. Like,
Um,
I
so,
personally, yeah,
oh,
I,
yeah, go ahead, finish.
yeah, uh, like I personally don't worship any deities in particular, but I am more, I guess, willing to accept certain practices and certain types of occultism. And I do research quite a bit about this, and it's an ongoing, I guess, a study form for me.
The other question is that there's a rumor going around. Well, it's actually a really long rumor, but is it true that Lilith from the Old Testament, from the Bible, was she considered to be one of the first vampires, or is that a myth? Do you know anything about that?
So, depending on what you believe spiritually, Lilith may or may not be something you believe in. There's also some rumors that she was either a demon of some sort, or that she became a demon, or that she's actually a vampire goddess, or that she's a demon mother, or something like that. I have also heard of some vampire-esque deities that actually do grant vampirism directly to their disciples. So it really depends on what you believe in particular. I have no real opinions about this because I don't worship any particular deities, and I'm not too concerned of worshiping any either. But I'm always aware that it could theoretically still be a possibility that there are beings out there.
So, becoming a vampire or a vampire, did you acquire any type of psychic abilities or any type of like superpower as becoming a vampire?
I mean, I don't know if I would say superpower necessarily. but there are instances where I have predicted little glimpses of the future. I have also had prophetic dreams where I can, in some very limited capacity, can see very brief glimpses into the future. Um, I can also, in certain instances, I am more, I guess, aware of the darker, more mysterious, evil, not really evil per se, but I have a deeper connection to the darker forces of this world, and I am in a constant state of euphoria in dark places.
The other question that I have is that since technically vampires are real, does this mean that werewolves are also real in your type in your understanding?
Um, I have met people who call themselves vampire or not. Well, yeah, it's vampires too, but um, clinical lycanthropy is a thing, and that's basically a medical condition where you believe you are a wolf and you act like one. I knew someone who, I don't want to give away too much information because information is sensitive these days, but he said he transformed into a wolf at night and was regularly caught in people's backyards howling at the moon. People said his real form didn't change in the slightest bit, but he said he felt like a wolf and lived a vampire or wow, werewolf esque lifestyle. So there's that.
So we're getting close to the end of our interview. Is there anything that you want to um share with the audience about yourself or anything about vampires you want people to know, or do you have any last messages before the end of the interview?
Um, I will say if you want to learn more about the vampire lifestyle, I would say look up Father Sebastian with Sebastian has two A's before the N at the end of the word. Logan South. Um, there have also been several vampire serial killers throughout history, but that could be a whole other discussion. Um, and also, I would also look up psychic vampirism if you want to get an idea of what um, if you want to get an idea of like potentially practicing it for yourself. There is a book tier list that goes from beginner to expert level. uh, I'm not sure about how you would acquire the tier list, but it was found on Reddit, so I would look around for that too. Besides that, nothing else I can add.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your life with people, the audience, and also thank you so much for educating us about vampirism. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome.